Welcome back to my channel, guys, and greetings from downtown Miami. Well, technically, I'm in Brickell, and Brickell is adjacent to downtown Miami. Brickell is the financial center of Miami, but these two areas, downtown and Brickell, are always kind of lumped together as the greater downtown area part of the city, which is completely different from Miami Beach, where I live. As some of you guys know, I live on the island of Miami Beach, and you get there from here by crossing a bridge over the bay. Now, it's not a crazy long trip, and yet it's such a different and distinct culture here versus the beach. You see it in the architecture, you see it in the people, the demographics. It's just such a different vibe that I thought it was time to make a video on the gay dating, gay travel, and so on experience here, and the juxtaposition of that here versus in Miami Beach. So I'll put up a link here somewhere if you guys want to check out one of my previous videos on the experience in Miami Beach for me as a local. But this video will be purely about the experience here on what I call the mainland. So one of my favorite things about Miami is the history around like the folklore of Miami. Historically, Miami always drew in crowds purely for tourism reasons. I mean, there was gambling on the beach, even illegal gambling back in the day. The beach, obviously, the climate was particularly appealing to professionals living in New York City, up north, Boston, DC, who would seek refuge during the winter away from, frigid temperatures. I mean, it's pretty unusual in the States to have a place like Miami with a tropical climate where midwinter you can lay, on the beach in your bathing suit. Historically, that's why people came to Miami. The city revolved around tourism. Over the last few decades, and really the last 5 to 10 years in particular, which was accelerated by the pandemic, COVID, there has been a huge evolution here on the mainland of Miami, particularly in this area called Brickell. This used to purely be the financial center of the city. So you had banks here and these towers of Bank of America and Chase and all of that. And you still have them here. But what you also now have is these high-rise condos, and you have Brickell City Center, which is this enormous modern mall, which literally takes up 3 blocks. And in my observation, this area sort of revolves around the mall. As weird as that might sound, the mall sort of has everything you might need. It has all your classic, shops, but there's also restaurants, there's a cinema, there's mini golf, there's escape rooms. I mean, it's an enormous commercial center that the neighborhood sort of revolves around. Not to mention, because of these newer high-rise buildings, you have rooftops. So you have rooftop lounges and you have nightlife. So like I said, the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of yuppies, young urban professionals, have moved into this area, making it sort of like a new metropolis of the United States. Now, with that, of course, also comes gay professionals, right? Who maybe they left another city. Maybe they used to live on the beach, like where I currently live, but wanted to live more in a city. As I mentioned, COVID really accelerated things. There's been a noticeable shift since the pandemic. Way more people living here now, way more professionals, especially now in this culture of so many people working from home. There are benefits to living in Florida financially as a business owner, taxation benefits, and of course the climate, right? So even though politically Florida is considered pretty controversial as a state, this little nook in Miami has consistently brought expats and professionals to reside here, and also a lot of tourists, which is so interesting to me because I can't imagine coming to Miami as a tourist and not wanting to stay on the beach. But I guess now we're at a point, in the culture of Miami, of the city, where enough people want to stay in the city because they want to stay at a luxury hotel with, a rooftop pool, and, maybe they want to go to the hot spot restaurants that just opened up. There's a lot of that kind of, to me, a lot of it is sort of flashy, like shiny new toy energy. There's always a new luxurious restaurant that opens up in this city, or a rooftop bar, and so on. That's not exactly my thing. I prefer living on the beach, But I do sort of marvel at how every time I come here, it's noticeable to me how much more attractive the people are here. It feels like, to me, a much sexier version of like a New York City. Walking around, you see people of all backgrounds. You consistently see a lot of hunks, a lot of like Latin or ambiguous, ethnically ambiguous hunks walking around in suits because, again, it's the financial center technically here. Well dressed, polished guys here. And to be honest, I don't see that much living on the beach. I feel like on the beach, there's really just a few types of people you always encounter. But whenever I'm here in Brickell or downtown Miami, I feel like I'm actually around professionals, yuppies, young urban professionals. And it feels a lot younger in particular versus when I'm on the beach. I feel like whether walking around my neighborhood or checking out the apps, it does feel like the crowd is older. And historically, Miami was always known as like a retirement destination. So I think that's also part of the culture that you have this older crowd who settled into Miami post working, but then the mainland, the city part of Miami, is now sort of shifting that culture and that dynamic. And you see a lot more 20 somethings and 30 somethings who want to live in, a metropolis vibe city without paying the cost of living in New York City or living in, let's say, Los Angeles, with the added bonus, of course, of the weather. So, like I said, every time I walk around here, I'm in awe of how attractive the guys are. And the emphasis, I would say, is that they're just more like polished. I definitely notice it here on the apps as well, the grinders and, those types of apps, the Tinders. I also find that there's quite a bit of DL culture here, a lot of discreet guys here, which I think is wrapped up in the culture of Miami. Obviously, there's the Latin infusion here in Miami, which is, typically a very Christian culture, Latin America. There's that machismo thing. And although I spot that on the beach as well, I feel like it's more intense here in the city. And that might just be because, again, we're in the financial hub, uh, a more sort of elevated professional level. So I feel like people here maybe have the mask more on and are sort of more, dare I say, salesman oriented. So there's inherently this sort of performative nature in the city that maybe I don't find as much on the beach. Again, on the beach, it's also hard to distinguish who's just visiting, who's a tourist versus who's a local. Whereas here in the city, outside of the mall, if people are just walking around, I feel like you can kind of tell who looks like they're local versus visiting. If I see a guy in a suit walking down the street here, I'm going to assume he's probably a local, although I guess he could be technically, traveling for work or something. Now, what's interesting about the gay presence here in the city is that there's actually no gay bars. There's gay friendly, LGBT friendly. You know how on Google Maps you look a place up and it'll say like this place is dog friendly, this place is LGBT friendly, da 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 da. There's that, but there's no like gay bars. And I've always found that interesting that the gay bars in Miami have always been on the beach since I've lived here. There was one bar in Wynwood. Wynwood is yet another area, which is historically was like kind of the warehouse district and very industrial. And it's since, just like downtown Miami and Brickell, it has since evolved into a cultural hub that's more like artsy, and there's a lot of nightlife there. Of course, warehouses, at night have a lot of potential in terms of club spaces and stuff like that. But Wynwood had one gay bar called, I believe it was called Willie's. And I believe that bar has since shut down, actually. So it's always been interesting to me. I think I talked about this recently on my channel, that Miami has always had a hard time sustaining, since I've lived here at least, has always had a hard time sustaining these gay bars, except for the really, really tourist ridden ones on the beach. But there are most certainly many gay people here. I see it walking around, I can tell. And then, using the apps, there's clearly a gay presence here. So I find that really interesting. And I think it's the result of multiple things. I think in this post-pandemic era, people are glued to their phones. They'd rather meet somebody through an app. It's expensive to go out all the time. And frankly, there are really nice bars here and lounges and nightlife rooftops and stuff that people I think just would prefer to be at versus like a hole in the wall dive bar. I say this with my gay friends all the time that there should be really posh, sophisticated gay bars, and I feel like those would do well. But I don't know, maybe if they were too sophisticated, too nice, then people who are not gay would want to go there too, and then it defeats the purpose of it being a gay bar. I don't know. It just seems like gay bars tend to be more trashy dive bar types. Who knows? I will say that in doing research for this video, when I wanted to fact check to make sure that there are indeed no true gay bars in the area, I found that there's multiple LGBT associations here, like groups that will meet for monthly happy hours and so on. And I have to say, one of them, I looked at their Instagram and I was impressed by what I saw, that they have these monthly meetups and the guys, again, look very polished, professional, and charming. It reminded me of when I lived in New York City and I would go to these kinds of meetups and I felt like I was meeting, interesting people from all different professions and all different backgrounds and all different passions, and that's something that I very much miss here living on the beach. And I know you're probably thinking, well, you're not that far, but you'd be surprised. When there's zero traffic, getting to the city from the beach here can take 20-25 minutes. With traffic, it can take an hour, if not more. So it is sort of a different bubble here, but I have to tell you, I would not trade living on the beach for living here any day. And this staycation that I'm doing at the time that I'm making this video, it's my birthday, so I wanted to do a staycation in the city and explore it further and actually like, spend a couple days here, partially to inform this video. I don't find the city of Miami stimulating enough for me to want to live here. And as I said, the city is still growing and it's tremendously evolved over the past several years, and it will keep evolving and keep finding its identity. There are different pockets and neighborhoods, but for me, the city always feels sort of like limited here. And maybe that's because I lived in New York City, probably the biggest metropolis in the United States. That for me is a real city where there's always something new to do. And here in Miami, in Brickell in particular, I just feel like you can only go to the next coolest, lounge or bar or rooftop so many times. At a certain point, it just feels redundant and even a little bit sterile to me. That's just my opinion. Whereas living on the beach, I feel like I always have this freedom to connect with nature, whether going on a bike ride, running on the boardwalk, going to the beach. I just feel more liberated, feel less stressed out as well. A city obviously has a more frenetic pace, and some people like that. I did that when I lived in New York. I don't miss it at all. But some people probably prefer the faster pace of downtown Miami or Brickell. So gay travel, gay dating, and so on, probably better in the city of Miami, probably more substantive, more serious versus running into a lot more tourists, on the beach where I live. But in terms of where I would want to reside, I personally much prefer the beach. And even for visiting, I just feel like the beach is more fun, more interesting, and more unique as well uh, for US travel. Let me know in the comments what you think, especially if you know the area well. Maybe you were born and raised in Miami. I would love to hear your 2 cents on the city versus the beach, as a gay person, what your experiences have been like and what your take is on all of this. I'll catch you guys next time.